Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing. Hey there, everybody. Today I have a wonderful guest, Greg M. I met Greg because he invited me to be on his podcast, which was awesome. And we connected so well as two empaths, just talking about all kinds of empath things that I was like, I really want to bring you on this show. And Greg is an energy alchemist, empath, and light grid weaver who helps transform energy in order to help people grow, heal, and thrive. Having suffered from a severe undiagnosed illness that almost killed him, he shares the tools he used to heal himself with others. His mission is to help awaken the beautiful people of Earth to their highest potential. He has trainings in all sorts of esoteric and healing, energy healing modalities such as hands-on healing, Mayan light language, astrology, crystals, sound healing, and more. And I'm sure that and more covers a whole lot of stuff. Greg, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
So good to be here. Like you said, we had such a great connection, and I can already feel that connection just growing even stronger as we are chatting. It's just lovely to be here.
So good. So, I usually like to start at the very beginning about being highly sensitive. And you and I talked about being male and being an empath and like the added challenges that come with that. But I gotta say, reading your bio, I'm like, severe undiagnosed illness that almost killed you? Like,
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. And then we'll go back to childhood. Yeah. But like,
it's an interesting one. But it's one that I look at now. I can look back now and understand what it was trying to tell me. But when you're in the middle of what's going on, you're like, I was in such fear and such anxiety and such separation from my truth that my body and my mind were just fighting against each other. And so it wasn't a surprise to me when, at the time it was, but now when I look back, it wasn't a surprise to me that the doctors didn't know what was wrong. I had lost most of my weight. I couldn't walk more than 20 feet without taking a breath. I was having heart palpitations every 5 minutes. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. And I was at the end of my physical sort of strength. So it took me right to the end. I'll tell you that.
And, it's so interesting just thinking about how so frequently my experience is that heart palpitations and empaths kind of go like, I don't know, peanut butter and chocolate, that it's heart palpitations often seem to be, even though they're a physiological symptom, I've noticed that for many of us, when things start getting intense as empaths, it will show up in our heart. But it sounds like, so you were basically dealing with and living with one of those weird beats me illnesses that the doctors have no freaking clue what it is or what to do about it. I'm curious, you were saying that you were kind of really separated and really divided between like your body and maybe your will. Was that almost like, were you finding yourself denying or ignoring yourself before the illness, or like, was the illness kind of the thing that was the wake-up call, or was the illness like a response to the stuff you were hitting the snooze button on the alarm?
Great question. You bring up such a great point, and that's exactly what was happening with me. Previous to this illness, I actually read the book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And at that period of time in my life, I was single. I had some money in the bank. I didn't really have any sort of responsibilities. And so I was able to really just immerse myself in that language and that idea. And literally, that book brought me to a stage of enlightenment. I got to a point where I was so present in each moment that you couldn't pull me out of the present moment. I wouldn't watch TV. I wouldn't read books. I would just be in such a state of joy and presence so deeply. And I held on to that for as long as I could. But then, the money started to dwindle. I had to get back into society. And I kind of got pulled in a direction. And a couple of years went by, and I was working with someone, and I just feel I just started absorbing their energy, or perhaps an attachment of some sort, and a voice started whispering in my mind, and it brought in fear, it brought in separation, it brought in like just uncertainty, which I was not used to, right? Because I was in that other state of just peace. And that's exactly what happened. It brought me to the state of fear, of uncertainty. I was actually, my anxiety was increasing. I was scared. And so my spirit and my mind sort of reacted and said, okay, well, if you're not going to wake up here, we're going to knock really hard on this door and kick this door down, in fact, so that you actually do have a chance and say, okay, are you ready to awaken?
Mm.
And it brought me to the end, I'll tell you. And that there was a point where I did try to let go of my body, and when I didn't let go, I knew that there's a voice inside of me said, "You know what? You're here for something greater than yourself, and it's time for you to start walking this mission step by step." And it took me a long time actually to fully heal from that. It took me actually about 5 years to fully heal from that unknown illness. And I went blind in one eye for a period of time. I had major pains all over my body, heart pains, palpitations. It was just a struggle. But I looked at each challenge like that as a test. And I had
Yeah.
financial challenges, like relationship challenges. It was just an all-in-one triple uppercut.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sort of when it rains, it pours. And I love how you are acknowledging, or you're talking about the fact that it was a journey, that it was a 5-year process to truly heal, because I think that so often in our culture, there's this idea that if you find the solution, it's going to be a quick fix. And so often the deep healing is not a quick fix. And in my experience, 5 years is really kind of almost like the bare minimum, and I'm not saying that we feel like crap the entire 5 years, but it definitely takes, in my personal experience as well, it takes many years to really come back to full vitality after one of those dips. So it sounds like it's interesting. It's almost like you had this spiritual awakening as a result of reading Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, and you were in this present bliss state of being fully present and fully there. And then it was kind of like it started to, I don't know, like almost dissipate or fade away. And you found yourself kind of having to go back into the matrix.
Yeah.
And then the stuff started to disintegrate. But I'm wondering about, now let's go back. Let's talk about, little Greg and what that experience was like. I'm even wondering, like, what was it that compelled you to dive so deeply into Tolle's book? Like, what was it that, like, what was going on that became like such medicine for you? Was the book a solution? Like, because I'm wondering, like, it feels to me that there is a piece of the story where it's like we've got the before, we've got the spiritual awakening with the book, then we've got this sort of, period of like, I can't just be sitting in a cave meditating 24/7. I need to make some money and I need to have a life. And then kind of the process of coming really, really that spiritual crisis, shamanic breakdown with your health. But I'm wondering about, like, what was going on prior to Eckhart Tolle that contributed to or feeds into the next pieces of, or the next chapters in your story?
That's a great question. Really, really perceptive. Even as a young boy, I knew that um, I guess I'd had a gift of seeing patterns and sort of just having a philosophical mind, and just sort of like, okay, well, what's the source of that? What is the source of this pattern? And I'd look up at the stars, and I would, as a child, play with crystals and play with pyramids and play with magnets, and until I got pulled away from that by my father figure, and wanted me to have the life that he never got to have as a child. So he threw me into all sorts of sports: hockey, baseball, soccer, everything under the sun. And so I got pulled away from that, but that still was inside of me, that I knew that magic was real. And I still, absolutely, magic is real. We are magic walking. And so I was just looking for, like you said, for that outlet to say, okay, how do I connect to that magic? Is it through the mind? And when I connected with that book, I was able to connect with the silence within myself, sort of that, they call it the void within your heart, which is the womb of the universal mother, the potential of all. And I was able to connect with that. And it was such a glorious connection because, that's the thing with knowledge. There's so much knowledge out there, so much available knowledge, but how do you put that knowledge into practice? And so when I actually walked that path and walked that wisdom, it actually happened to me automatically without words, or without thought. And so I got into that through that sort of that action. And so that book really was the key that turned that door and opened it for me. It was like, wow, here it is.
Or brought you back to it, because it sounds like you were born magical. You were seeing the world through these eyes of wonder and, crystals and pyramids and magnets and amazing stuff. I'm sure you would have been an absolute delight as a little boy. Like, I'm just like, God, I would have loved to have babysat you when you were a little kid, because I'm just sure you were just so incredibly dear. And I just want to pull out the quote you just said, which I'm just like, this is a t-shirt quote. We are magic walking. Oh my God, that's exquisite. That's so beautiful.
I really believe that.
So it sounds to me like it's almost like there's been this kind of journey of knowing yourself and forgetting yourself, and knowing yourself and forgetting yourself. And, as you were saying, like, your father gave you what he did not get to have for himself. And in his perspective, it was lots of sports. And having had two nephews who were heavily into hockey, uh, just hockey alone is like a lifestyle experience. And so I can only imagine, if not only were you playing hockey, but you were also doing other kinds of sports, that your life was probably driven by being an athlete.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. And being an empath and being sensitive, I also had to deal with, an angry father, a verbally, emotionally abusive father. If I didn't play a perfect game or play the sport perfectly, I would be yelled at the entire time on my way home. And sometimes it'd be an hour or 2 hours to our destination. And so I would just sit and like basically cry the whole time because I didn't know how to, like, I just absorbed all of that anger and all that rage. And that was very difficult. And so I had to, I guess I learned tools to sort of cope. And one of the tools I started to use in my early age was actually video games. I started playing a lot of video games early because it was one thing that I can go into a world that I could just get lost in, and I knew the parameters of that world, that nobody could break in and start raging at me. And so I got lost in that world of video games for a very long time, actually.
Yeah. I was talking with Nicole Kerr earlier, who had a near-death experience, and she and I were talking about eating disorders with women in particular, and how so often food is one of the things that many of us as women feel like we can control. And so it's just thinking about that. It's like, yeah, I never really thought about video games from that standpoint of it is a world we can control, but totally, it's a world you can control when everything else is not controllable. I'm also imagining that, like, it's like, I'm just thinking about the compounded nature of every one of those boys on the teams, like, is also dealing with the pressure to perform, is also dealing with possibly parents who are going to be berating them on their way home for not playing the game the right way. And as an empath, I'm thinking, you're not just picking up your own father's rage and the intensity of that, but I'm kind of imagining the games themselves were just fraught with stress, because you've got this team of kids who are all trying to please their parents and please the coach and win the game. Because of course there's, I think it was in Talladega Nights, it's like, basically it's like you're either the first place or you lost. Like, it's sort of, there's no such thing as like a winner in second place. And so I'm just thinking, wow, what a level of stress you must have been experiencing.
Yeah, it was certainly, when I look back, a scary time,
Yeah.
a scary time indeed. I mean, I look at back now as I look back and I'm in gratitude because I learned a lot. I met a lot of great friends, lifelong friends, but it was challenging. It was really challenging and really heavy in the heart. And I went through even like depression in my teenage years. I'm just like, where am I? Why is this so difficult? Why is everyone so angry?
Mm, mm.
Why am I being so like, and I knew I was a very, very gentle, very sweet, very shy, but that would just put me more into that box, right? That pressure of having to, be somebody I wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you pivot? Like when did because I'm imagining like Eckhart Tolle and even getting like really, really, really sick happened after a point, but there's like, when did you leave sports? Like, what was it that had you, like, did you get out and go to college, like university, or like, what did you do that got you out from underneath your father's expectations and thumb?
Great question. Because I had a gift in patterns and I was already working with the computers and video games and playing video games, it was a natural step for me to go into computers and computer support. And so I got sort of driven into that place because it was just easy for me to get work, to make money. And I really just kind of kept myself busy, still playing video games, still not really finding myself. But throughout my life, there was always these things that would happen. And they were always very strange that would be like either paranormal or
Mm-hmm.
unknown. So, for example, when I was 12 years old, I saw a UFO and I was out in my backyard feeding my dog. It was summertime. It was about maybe 10, 11. The sun just had set and I saw this light in the sky and I'm walking towards my house. It was maybe 40 feet away. And I'm looking at this light and I'm thinking to myself, what is that? Is that a plane? I don't see the lights blinking. It's not a helicopter. It's not a plane. Is it a new light in the farmer's field? Because I lived in a very small town of about 1,000 people. And I'm like thinking to myself, okay. And I was already very aware of UFOs and stuff like that. And then my mind actually said, is that a UFO? And the moment that I said that thought in my mind, this object, this light went straight up into the sky at light speed and it left a trail of light. So I actually saw how fast light speed is. And it freaked me out as a 12-year-old boy. I ran
Yeah.
inside. And so I had these things happen like that. And even my first memory actually wasn't me like being a kid. I remember coming to earth. And so
Mm-hmm.
I remember myself being something called a walk-in. I remember actually like I was going to take over this body at about 3 or 4 years old. And it wasn't like I was going to be born in a baby. It was like a young boy. And so I've had very strange things happen to me and, ghosts, like a lot of ghost things would happen. Like it was pretty wild. And inside I knew I just wasn't ready to deal with it.
Right, right. Well, and you didn't have any validation. You didn't have anybody confirming this reality or this experience for you. You were being told, suck it up, buttercup, and go play sports. So
That's right.
I can only imagine like how hard that must have been. And I really, I really do think like in our culture, females at the very least are generally socialized to be empathic in the sense of like we're encouraged to think about other people, we're encouraged to be kind, we're encouraged to give to the point of bleeding out, but there is more, and we're also encouraged to be emotionally expressive in a way that I think males are not encouraged as much. And so I'm just really hearing you and thinking about like this amazingly intuitive, psychic, clairvoyant inner life, and then this reality that you're trying to fit, desperately trying to fit into.
That's exactly desperately trying to fit into. I was very anxious. My friends, they were at the ages of, early 20s and mid 20s, late 20s, going out, going to the bar, going to like big parties. I couldn't handle it. I didn't know
Mm-mm.
how to handle it. So I would stay home, either watch a movie or two, have a few friends over that I knew that I trusted, and we would just either watch movies or play video games. And I did that for over a decade just to like you said, fit in so that I didn't have to deal with all this heavy stuff because I could barely handle my own emotions and how that worked. So I had to just like create this little safe space, this little routine, this little structure that I can get through my day without being overwhelmed.
Mm. I'm just sort of sitting with and thinking about like just the magnitude of that. And that lasted, you were saying, for a good 10 years of your life where
Oh,
you were
yeah,
just,
at least
yeah. So you're just on autopilot.
on pure autopilot. And finally, when I got to my 30s, that voice inside of me in my heart was like, okay, you need to do something. You need to make a change. And I did one of the things in my mind was the most difficult was to like leave everything behind. So I literally left my city, left my hometown, and I moved halfway across the country to the coast so
Mm.
that I just had no more excuse. I had to start new. I had to like put myself out there. And I felt by doing that, I would challenge myself into dealing with what I had to deal with. And then another chapter continued there, and it still wasn't easy, right?
Right,
Because as we
right.
know as empaths, is you got to figure this stuff out, and it's unique to each of us.
Right, right. Well, and when I was younger, and I was even younger than you when when I basically like did the geographic cure. And in my experience, the thing is that if something is not working, moving to a new location does not make it better. If anything, the best description, one of the best descriptions I've ever heard is like you can take a donkey, you can put it in a crate, and you can ship it across the country. But when you open up that crate, you're just going to find a pissed off donkey. And I'm just imagining like there were so many things like you were ready for a change, but I know in my experience that picking oneself up and like, and sort of like dropping ourselves back down in a new location, at least for me, really provoked a crisis. Like that was in many ways, like I thought things were going to work. I thought it was going to be easier, and it was not. And that was when, for me, I went, you know what? You got to do something different because geographic location, geographic cure is not going to cut it. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that relocation in some ways acted as a catalyst for the healing crisis.
That's a good question. And I think in my specific case, my unique case was that, I was in a bad relationship at the time. And it was just like this toxic going back and forth. And on top of that, I also had a family that didn't understand me and were quite manipulative and loved using guilt as a tool to control.
Mm,
Right.
mm,
So,
mm.
me removing myself physically from that gave me some extra space to figure out what the heck is going on in my life. Like, who am I? What am I really feeling? Who am I feeling? Is it actually me that I'm feeling, or is it somebody else? So it allowed me to detach from
Yes.
my own specific needs. And so that I could actually see from a distance and be like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it now.
Nice. Well, and I think that giving ourselves space, like being able to go into a level of silence and stillness is sometimes absolutely necessary. Like we've got to turn the noise down in order to be able to recognize like what is the noise we are picking up? What is the noise we are hearing? And that I think can make such a huge difference. And I'm also imagining I was like 23 and a little bit older when I sort of pulled that number on myself. And I was really a pup. Like I really did not have it together. And I'm imagining like you had a job, you had a rhythm for yourself. So perhaps like you had enough resources that you really were able to use that space, and relocating as a way to find yourself.
That's exactly right. I gave myself enough time and investment in what I was doing to give myself that sort of resources to get to that next stage, because unfortunately we do need money, we do need things to get us to do certain things in life, and that's just a part of it.
Mhm.
But I wasn't in that state of abundance, right? I was still in that sort of left brain, I got to work really hard to get this. And that's what I still knew there was a better way to do things, but I just didn't know how yet. And
Right.
so I just needed like to quiet my mind and to have some fresh energy around and perhaps meet some new people that were like-minded to sort of help me get to that next spot. And it did. It really actually worked wonders for me. But I do agree that your problems will follow you. No matter how far you go, you're going
Yeah.
to have those problems follow you. But in my specific case, it allowed me that extra little bit to separate myself from that family that was so controlling and so manipulative, and as well as a toxic relationship that I was in. And it was just how I worked at the time that allowed me to disconnect from that and to
Yeah.
start listening to my heart and start
Yeah.
listening to what's really going on inside me without so much external noise.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just thinking in my own experience that as I got older, separating from my family enough that I could really start discerning what are my family's messages, what are the inherited legacies, what is the stuff that I'm just kind of like recapitulating, and what's really mine, that there is something so powerful about taking that space and giving ourselves permission to find what is truly our truth. And it's so powerful. So I'm curious within this, where in the timeline is the power of now? And where in the timeline is the undiagnosed illness in terms of the moving?
So I moved when I was about 30 years old.
Hmm.
And I was about 2 years after that, I really got involved with the power of now and the work involved in that. So that was about 30 to 32. And I'm 43 now. And so over a decade ago, I went through this stuff. And it was, so enlightening in so many ways. Like I can still feel that energy when I think back to that time. And so that's always sort of my gauge as to where I'm at as far as my presence is concerned. And, it took courage, right? Like, and it takes courage for everybody to find that inner space, to find that place within yourself, and to give yourself that permission to say, you know what? I need more than what I have right now. And in order for me to find out what that is, I need to create that space, that silence, and whatever that means for you out there. If it's spending time in nature, or if it's playing with your kids or playing with your pets or meditating or drawing, whatever it is, it takes courage. And you know what? Like you got to pat yourself on the back because it's not easy. We live in a world that it's very distracting and manipulative, and guilt has been used in our family to try to control us. You know, not that it's like I'm looking back and I'm, angry. I've really worked a lot on forgiveness, but you just see things for what they really are. And when you can operate from that place of love and understanding, man, it just changes everything.
Mm, mm. I was thinking as you were speaking about guilt being used as a tool to manipulate, I find also like sort of, I don't know, like a dressed up, it's like guilt with lipstick is the feeling of obligation and family responsibility. And just all of the times where there's a request or a thing that is being expected of us. And yet our soul is like, no, this is not my job. This is not my circus, not my monkeys, not my thing, not what I want to do. And yet, like all of that burden of responsibility that so many of us fight, have to come up against. And then, of course, as an empath, I have been noticing that we also not only are we picking up on their emotions, but we pick up on their will body, we pick up on their desire body, we pick up on the part of them that really wants us to do something, and it can be really hard not to.
It's heavy.
It's
It's
heavy.
it's
Yeah.
very heavy, and very, like, it has a controlling energy, and if you're not aware of it, it can actually make you do things that you normally wouldn't do, especially as a sensitive and an empath. Like you're like, okay, well, I guess I have to make this person happy because that's who I am.
Well, and we can find ourselves in relationships with people. I mean, I actually think that some of the empath narcissist dynamic is that as empaths, we get really sucked into the desire body of a lover. It becomes kind of like a hall of mirrors where we don't know what's ours and what's theirs because it can be so intoxicating. And I just think that untangling ourselves from that is just such an incredible journey. And it sounds like you have really spent the last 10 years of your life untangling yourself.
That's exactly right, and it still continues,
Yeah.
right, to be
Yeah.
untangled, and but I've really have put this at the forefront of my life, and one of my sort of axioms to myself is, I am better than I was yesterday, and that's it, and it's just one day at a time. I want to be better than I was yesterday, and if I can do that after a decade, I'm going to be you know, vibrating at a much higher rate. And I can say when I look back 10 years ago, I am a completely different person, but I wouldn't have been this person if I didn't have those challenges. And so I looked at now I can look back at these challenges that I went through, incredible, tough challenges on so many levels, and say, thank you for leading me to my true self and to my gifts that I'm now ready to share with the world. And the fact that I'm even talking on this podcast 10 years ago, I would say, no way. I don't want to be talking on, I don't want to share myself. I don't want to be vulnerable. I didn't want to talk to anybody. So there's no way I could see myself doing that. And so
Mm,
I look at that polarity and be like, I'm a completely different human because I'm now sharing from that place from my heart.
mm, mm. And you have an amazing podcast, which I'm imagining would also not be happening 10 years ago.
I'm doing things that I would never have thought I would be doing because I just had always had an excuse to just block out things that would challenge me to grow, things that would challenge me to sort of awaken and to heal. I would say, oh, no, I'm just going to get through this life. But I didn't come here for that. I came here to actually see these challenges, bring them to the surface, and then untangle them, like you said, untangle day by day. And you know what? I still make mistakes on a daily basis, right? But I recognize them quicker now. I don't just sit in that energy and allow that as an excuse just to be who I was. I'm like, I could have been better in this situation. How can I be better next time? And it's as simple as that. It's like not using guilt and saying, oh, shame on you. You're supposed to be spiritual. It's about being honest with yourself and saying, we're human. We're going to make mistakes, but I don't look at mistakes as mistakes anymore. I look at mistakes as experiences to grow from.
Yes. I see mistakes as data, is what I've come to look at it as. And that I really like every single experiment is giving us data about what works and what doesn't, and that mistakes are the opportunity to course correct. And as long as we don't have that, crippling, soul crushing shame and guilt, mistakes are just a part of the learning process. And I mean, I always think about like Edison and what is it like, how many hundreds of iterations of light bulb did he go through before he was able to create the light bulb? And I just think about, or at least that's the myth, but because I know that there's also like, Tesla and other people who were involved in electricity and different stuff too. But it's sort of, I sometimes think about like if those people, the scientists, gave up after like one experiment and they were like, well, that didn't work. I'm never going to do it again. How many things would we not even have on this planet if those people allowed their sense of guilt and shame and interpreting data as like you screwed up? Like, what would we not even have on this planet?
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Such a good point. And we're no different than these experiments. We are this walking painting that's being painted as we continue to live and grow and experience. So we are just a walking a masterpiece, right? Being created as we experience. So if we look at ourselves as that, as this work of art that's just in continuous motion, and look at our experiences, our so-called mistakes as chances to like, I'm going to draw this little piece on the mountain now, or choose this color for the tree. And instead of, like you said, holding guilt and holding that energy of like negativity down, you're going to use it to be like, wow, I'm going to choose this color now for my masterpiece. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm just thinking about like the beauty that there is that I can't remember the name of it, but the Japanese art of repairing pots using gold. And the idea of like, even like from something that is supposedly broken, we can create greater beauty and refine things into something even more exquisite. So I want to go back to, so we're in this kind of like period over, between like basically like around, I imagine 2011, 2012 to now. And it's like, and there's that going back and forth, but like, what was the pivotal, like what happened? How did you pull yourself up out of this illness? Like, what was I don't know, like light dawns on marble head. What was the aha moment or the aha moments? Like, what happened? How did you pull yourself up out of like nearly dying?
It was a culmination of several different things. One, it was that whatever came into my mind and my heart was like, you've come here for something to beyond yourself. And then I had this other thought of like, everything that now comes towards you, you have to look at it like a test. And even to this day, my statement to myself is, I'm going to be tested on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Some of the tests are going to be easy, some are going to be hard, but my intention is to pass my tests. So I started looking at life as that. And if I didn't, I guarantee I wouldn't be here, because I went through some pretty ridiculous tests. I tell you that, because the jobs I was telling you about, the easy jobs I used to have, weren't so easy, because I had to get a job working at a beer store at minimum wage when I was actually at my physical weakest. And so
Ah,
you can imagine how my mind, I'm being bossed around by these like 20-year-olds, and I'm 35 years old. And these guys are like laughing at me, getting me to carry beer around, cases of beer for fun that I could barely lift. And so
well,
if I,
and I'm imagining also if there was any kind of like mold or yeast component to what your illness was, like being in a brewery around all of that yeast was probably the worst thing that your gut, because I'm sort of imagining just what I know about health is the relationship, the gut brain connection, and the gut issues that so frequently these mystery illnesses look to the gut and fix the gut is often where a lot of shifts happen. So I'm just thinking you're carrying cases of beer in an environment that probably has like yeast everywhere. I don't imagine that it was particularly good for your physical health, much less your mental and emotional health.
absolutely. And, in and out of freezers, in and out of cold. Right. And so this is what I laugh now, because I do find it funny. It was a test on every single level: my mental, my emotional, my physical. And so if I didn't see it for what it was, a test, I guarantee you I would have failed it. But because I saw it as a test, okay, I'm going to pass my test. I understand, I see it from a different perspective, a higher perspective. And when I started doing that, and when I started like living my life that way, and I started passing these tests, it was amazing how much my life and how quickly my life would change. So that period of my life didn't last very long, because I saw things as a test. I wasn't resistant to it. I wasn't like, damn, I'm a victim. Damn these people for putting me into this. I was like, I want to pass this no matter what. And then another opportunity came, and then another opportunity came. Right. So then I got a job at a bike store, like lifting bikes I could barely lift off and on the rack again. And so I just, again, looked at it as a test, and my life got better and better and better. So it just solidified everything that I knew in my heart that was happening. Was like, I am vibrating, and my frequency is creating these opportunities. And so it just solidified the magic that we really are. And then the magic continued by me self-healing and waking up one day and having the gift of having the energy healing capability in my hands. And so like these gifts, just like each day, just something magical would happen.
Wow. So as you're speaking, I'm having this image of you as an archetype. Like I'm like, you have this like almost like knight like KNIGHT, quality to you as you are talking about sort of these ordeals. Like it's kind of like we're not talking like a math test. We're talking like these ordeals, like you're running the gauntlet and you're being like, instead of being like, oh my God, why is this thing coming at me? You're like, bring it. I'm
Yeah.
ready. I'm willing. I'm going to take this on. And so I'm hearing, and so was there a point where you made the choice to accept this? Like, was there a pivot, or had you always been kind of inclined towards thinking of things as a test?
I was already kind of inclined to that, but I never put that into actual motion or into practice. I just kind of was on this like unconscious let me say semi-conscious path. And then I
Mhm.
decided to take it all consciously and say, you know what, if I really believe the things I believe, let's put them all into action. And when I started doing that, my life started changing very drastically. My health improved. I got better jobs. And then I dove back into the esoteric stuff that I loved as a child. All that came back full circle 30 years later. And all this stuff just like started coming to the surface. And like one of the first things that happened to me was my hands started vibrating like at such a strange level that my left brain was like, okay, like, do you have are you, is your blood cut off, or do you have to go to the hospital? But my heart was like, no, you know exactly what's going on. This is just a part of who you really are. And so I started using my hands to heal my girlfriend at the time who had bad knees and a bad feet and bad back. And it was miraculous, this gift, but I wasn't egotistical for me because I actually looked at it as an honor to
Mm-hmm.
serve the people that I'm here on earth with. And what I've gone through as an empath is like, I don't want people to suffer
Mm-mm.
like I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like pain is unavoidable, but I do believe suffering is an option.
Yeah.
And so I just really wanted to be the best that I can be, to be at that high level of service for people. And so I was shown exactly what I needed to be shown for when I was ready for it. And so here we are all these years later, and this is still one of my tools I use in my work, but a lot of other tools have come to the surface too. So everybody out there has a unique gift and ability, just like each snowflake is unique on this planet. We are a unique sacred geometric form, and we just have to like look in ourselves to find that unique gift and ability to sing that unique song that we all have within ourselves.
Mm-mm. Going back to talking about just the process of healing, what I really hear in this is that there wasn't like you found a supplement or you found a modality or like it really was all about energy and it was all about intention and it was about your willingness to be, in many ways, present with exactly what was going on for you. And in your willingness to be present with what was going on for you, miracles started to unfold and your life started to shift to the point where your hands were activated to be as a healer. And I mean, then I'm imagining what an adventure.
What an adventure. But you know what? One thing I did not mention, I should mention, was that I was allergic to everything under the sun when I was,
Mm-hmm.
especially as a kid, I was allergic to milk and cheese and bread. And as a teenager, I would eat food. And back then in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't really alternative ways to eat. You ate what you
Mm-mm.
ate. And so
Right.
I had constant brain fog. I had constant like a fatigue and exhaustion. I could barely stay up in school. And I just thought, okay, well, I guess that's how I'm built. But I was always on this like, this path to be like, there's got to be a better way. So I would experiment with crazy things. Like I would drink like, 8 liters of distilled water a day and all this. I'd take cold showers and try to like energize my back and do all these things that were alternative. But then I realized, the older I got, it's like I took things away from my diet, like bread. I took milk away and my health started to improve, because
Mm-hmm.
not always are we going to be a match for the food that is being created in the world for whatever reason it is, whether it's GMO or whatever, it's energy behind there. But when I started to do that, my energy would increase, my mental focus would increase, everything would just kind of strengthen. And so now, even when like in modern times, in this present moment, I can still have pizza and cheese and bread once in a while because my body now has the energetic reserves to actually break down this food, instead of me just hammering down, gluten and milk every single day. Now I can actually have this once in a while because now I'm in tune with my body.
Yes. Yes. Our bodies, like the best description I've heard for food allergies is thinking in terms of like rain barrel effect. And that when it comes to environmental sensitivities and allergies, like we can kind of put so many drops of water into the barrel. And then there's that point where we just one too many drops and suddenly the barrel just explodes. But the cool thing is, and what I'm hearing you say is this is your experience, is that if you can get a lot of that water siphoned out of the barrel, you have a little bit more wiggle room for like having pizza or some other thing without it basically sending your body into a tailspin. And I certainly have found that the more healed my body and my spirit are, the more flexibility I have around food and even around like fragrances and other stuff. Like, used to be that I couldn't walk down the candle aisle in the grocery store without feeling horrible afterwards and just really disoriented. So it gets better if
It
we do the
does.
work. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does.
So you've talked about the embracing the test and embracing the process. You've also really talked about being in the moment and being here now. Before you and I jumped on to the recording, we were talking about, the fact that you had been feeling kind of a heaviness recently. And like sort of being aware of that, and then the shift from that heaviness to the joy. Talk to me about
Yeah.
that.
Well, as you know, being an empath, we pick up on energies that aren't ours, and being a male in a sort of this sort of toxic masculine world that has just warped everything that we do. I guess I chose this life as a big test to be like, you know what, when you get through this, you're going to have so much more to actually share, because I feel that's a really important thing for healers and for people that are out there that are trying to help other people. Is like, you can do so much more when you actually get through those experiences, because then you can look back and share those experiences with others, and being vulnerable and realizing that just because I'm a male doesn't mean I'm not in touch with my feminine side, doesn't mean I'm not in touch with my emotions. I'm actually more in touch with my emotions than a lot of people. I'm very sensitive, but I look at that now, instead of me looking as a curse back then and sort of hiding myself in this bubble. I look at it like I can actually help inspire other men, and as well as women, to be like, you know what, I'm vulnerable, I'm strong. I believe I'm very strong, but it doesn't come from my mind. It comes from my heart, and my heart is my key. My heart is my home, and this is where I go to every day to find that place, to find that peace within me, and it brings me that joy. So now that I've actually learned to sort of discern between what is mine and what is not, I was feeling, a couple of days ago, this energy in the air. I call it in the air because I don't know exactly where it is, but I know it's not mine. And
Mm-hmm.
so I felt it want to attach to me. And because that's just what you get used to. You're like, oh, I'm feeling this, it must be me. Well, guess what? No, I've already been through that. I know that's not me. And so I see you, I recognize you, and I allow you to be, but you're just not in me at all. And so I went back to that place inside of me that brings me joy, that brings me peace. And that was the primary feeling that I was feeling. So I was able to just to be the energy I was and influence everything else, instead of me being influenced by everything out there.
And so, and I mean, you're speaking my language, because what you're talking about is, the first step of empathic mastery. Recognizing what's ours, what's not ours, and then not owning the stuff that is not ours, not being responsible for that, not feeling ourselves just carrying it around. I love how you were speaking to the idea, or the sort of the truth of emotional intelligence and emotional vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. And if anything, I actually think it's a sign of strength. The other thing that you've been talking about that I really want to pull out, because I am so totally in agreement with you, is that the heart is the portal, that the heart is the key. And for me, I call the heart like that. I find my heart is the portal to the universal sacred heart. And that it's like there is something about living from the heart as opposed to from the head. Like that is a complete game changer.
Oh my goodness. And the funny thing about this is, like, I've actually used myself as an experiment, especially in the past 10 years, as to how this actually benefits me in a real way. And for example, I was in a very, working in computers and such, you're multitasking all the time. And when you're stuck in your mind, you can just get into this, like, looking at things through a straw, and things aren't coming. So then I started actually putting my presence in my heart, and guess what happened? Answers would come to me, solutions
Mhm.
would come to me without effort. And life became actually easy instead of it being challenging, because I allowed my mind to be sort of the secondary. And my heart would sort of make a command. And then my mind would say, okay, here's how you do it physically. So, I actually have direct experience with that. That's actually how it works. The heart should be the master in our lives, right? It actually should be guiding us to the things that we want, and then it tells the mind, okay, how do we physically do that? How do we actually, move to that state? So, like I said, I have a direct experience with that, and it makes me just so joyful, even in this moment, to know that's how it works. But when you start doing that for yourself, and you start to actually be present in your heart, and your life actually just starts to unfold for you effortlessly, and with what you want, you just start to smile inside and be like, wow, this is actually how it works. But unfortunately, we're not taught that, especially as men,
Mm-mm.
especially as like in the society of competition, of like just greed and mine versus yours, or me versus you, and this divisive, everything's divided. And
Yeah.
it creates this massive like collective pain
Yeah.
that we got to start to fight for everything.
Yeah. Well, and we're taught, even as females, we are taught to perseverate and we're taught to live in the narrative. And I'm sure you've had this experience as a healer as well, where it's like people come with their stories, but they're head stories, not heart stories. And it's like the head stories, we're just stuck in, like, we're stuck in Maya with the head stories. We're just constantly, and for anybody who's wondering what Maya is, that is yeah, I believe Hindu or Sanskrit word for illusion, and kind of the form of reality that what we consider reality is actually Maya, is illusion. But just like that, living in the head, I think that it is not just, it's absolutely like the competitive side of it, the man, I'll figure it out, like all of that. Like there's definitely a whole, like it's like in the head on steroids with the man, with men. But I think our whole culture is just so geared towards being in the head instead of in the heart.
Yeah, and it's such a good point, and I really do believe that it's like if you could look at us energetically, and especially those that are typically involved in sort of the masculine way of things, I'm sure that you would see their energy being going around their heart. So they don't actually feel their heart unless it's physically painful. So they don't actually listen to their heart as a place of wisdom, which is what's wrong with this world. If we can actually like re-embrace that truth within us, men and women, and find that place of peace and balance, then everything's just going to unfold for us pretty much automatically. Yes, there's
Yeah.
going to be some things to go through, but we're going to be guided like it's magic, and it's going to make you smile. And I think that's what we need to get to. Instead of this big divide that this world is going through right now, we need to find that place that we were talking about before, to bridge that gap. How
Yeah.
do we find that connection? Because ultimately, we are all one. We are all made of love and light. That is the truth. It's just now, how do we actually bridge that in this sort of physical world that we find ourselves in? Even if we don't maybe agree on everything, how can there be a place we can rise above, find that perspective, that higher awareness, and be like, I still see you, even though I
Mm-hmm.
may not agree with what you're saying. I still see you. I know who you are in truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even if they don't know who they are in truth,
That's right.
because some people are so totally. For me, I can have, I will, when I'm noticing that I'm getting snarky, and when I'm noticing that I'm falling into my head and getting judgmental or something, I try to cultivate compassion and just really like just having that level of compassion. So I'm amazed at how quickly our conversation has gone by. We are getting to that point in time with this. I'm wondering if there's anything else that just feels really important that you want to share.
Time does fly.
Yeah,
And
doesn't it?
there's just so much to really say, but I think I've said a lot throughout this wonderful conversation that we had. But just to quickly recap, is that you are the creator of your reality. If you have created something that you don't like, then you can uncreate it. And one thing I always say is that the goal of fear is to create more fear. And the goal, and really what love creates, is more love. So when things are created out of love, they live forever, such as children and whatever you create out of love, artwork, an art piece, it lives forever. But when things are created out of fear, you can uncreate them. And so I'm a living example of that in how I've lived my life and what I've created. I created the self in illness to help awaken me to who I really am. I uncreated this illness. And so I just want to give everybody out there that opportunity to realize that you are powerful, that you are really magic in motion, and that the sooner that you can recognize it, the sooner that the magic can actually take place in your life. Find that place in your heart that you are one with everything. And when you do, your life is going to unfold magically and pretty much effortlessly. It's not that we're not going to have challenges, but when you look at life through having, tests and seeing life as a test, and you're going to be tested, just like when we have a day where we're feeling, maybe a little bit snippy, a little bit angry. I mean, I look at that as that's the easy way. That's what everyone else does. I want to take the road, the high road. And the high road isn't necessarily the easy road. I find it the most hard road. But when you start to walk that path more often, that path becomes more firm. It turns into an actual path. Instead of it walking through a middle of a bush, it becomes a path because you've been taking it, you've been walking it. And then it becomes easier to walk that path. It becomes easier to be compassionate and to be forgiving to yourself, especially gentle on yourself, and to be compassionate and gentle with others, because that's really why we're here. And when you walk that path, you become a vibration, you become a frequency of that, so that you start to attract those sort of those frequencies, whether they're people, whether they're situations, whether they're opportunities. You become that magnet for what you're vibrating at. So I just want to remind everybody out there that you are powerful, that you are loved, that you are love.
Mm. You are powerful, you are loved, and you are love. So, Greg, before I ask you the next question, I'm going to ask you a question before that, which is, could you lead us through an example of when you kind of come up to a blip in the radar, or like, you were talking about how you had been feeling sort of that little bit of heaviness before. Could you just sort of lead us through, like, what are the steps you take? Like, what does it look like in real time action in terms of when you are facing a test, when you're facing a moment of things not necessarily feeling easy? How do you access the wisdom that you're talking about?
I love this question. This is a really great question. Thank you for asking that. Now, when you become aware of your body, when you become more in tune with that silence within yourself, then you're going to be able to have that gap to determine what is yours and what is not. And if we're on that empathic path, then it's going to become easier if you're on that path. And if you're not, there's some work to do, and that's okay. But remember, there's the emotion, there's the physical and the mental. And so in the instance that I had felt this heaviness, it was an emotion. And so because I don't just allow any emotion to take me over, I recognize it first, because I've worked on this, and it took me some time to work on that, but I can sense the emotion before I let it take me over. I become the gatekeeper of my consciousness. My consciousness is the light, and I decide what I allow into my consciousness. So if I'm feeling something in my stomach, then that could be an anger coming up, a anxiety coming up, but I'm able to recognize and say, you know what, no further we're going to go than this, because I see you now, and now I choose to let go of you.
Mm.
And if, for example, you feel something in your body is also like a pendulum, like it's a map. So if you're feeling something in your stomach, or you have a headache or something, your body's trying to tell you something. And so if we actually just sort of silence ourselves, silence our minds, and go to that stillness just for a little bit, your body's going to tell you what it needs, whether it's to step away from an environment, to step away from a person, to drink water, or to have something else in your diet. It's really as simplistic as that. So it's just about stepping out of that energy that's trying to take you over. And it really isn't trying to take you over. We're just used to that. It's just there to say, hey, I'm here. What
Mhm,
are you going to do
mhm,
with me? And most of
mhm,
us just automatically say, okay, this is energy is mine, and I'll take it over. But now you have the choice, become the gatekeeper of what energy that you want in your body. For me, I choose love. And if I'm not feeling love, I'm seeing it for what it's trying to teach me. Okay, so I'm looking at this as an opportunity to teach me. And for example, in that one that came up just the other day, I felt like a heaviness, almost like an annoyance, almost like it's like I should be angry, I should be annoyed. But, because I'm able to now distance myself and see that, I was able to dissolve that in moments, and now cultivate that place again in my heart and bring up that joy, because that's who I am.
mhm.
Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, it's sort of,
It's
it's
simple, but
simple, but
there's
it's, yeah. Well, and what I'm really, one of the things that I was really taking from this is, like, in some ways it comes back to, am I approaching this from love? Like I'm really hearing that, like, in some ways that's really what we always want to come back to is, am I approaching this with love? And the other thing that I really heard is, the answer is actually fairly simple. We notice it, we acknowledge it, we sort of say, hello, here you are. But instead of, like, going doubling down on it, resisting it, like letting it sort of hijack us or take us over, we can just acknowledge it, but also our inner wisdom, our inner guidance. What is this? Where is this coming from? What is this about? And that we get the answers. And you reminded when you were sort of speaking to like listening to that wisdom and being like, oh, this is about that relationship that I need to step away from. Oh, this is about that food that I ate yesterday. This is about this or that. I was struck by the fact that one of the things that I've seen working with a lot of people is how much we second guess our intuition and how frequently, I mean, my experience is that we get the answer almost immediately. If you ask, you get the answer. But then we go backwards. We backpedal and we start telling ourselves stories of, oh, it couldn't possibly be that. Oh, no, that's too simple. Or we don't want to acknowledge the answer because it's going to be inconvenient. And I'm just, what you are saying is really reminding me of that it's like the answers are simple and they are there. And as long as we are listening and living in the heart and from a place of love, it's all good.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
You said that so well. I've been smiling the whole time. It's
Mm,
just about recognizing that the answer is usually the simplest one.
yeah.
And then the mind might try to take over, but then you just ask yourself, is what I'm thinking and feeling right now serving my best self?
Yeah.
And if not, come back to that place in your heart
Yeah.
and operate from that place and watch how powerful, watch how quickly you transform and the people around you are going to be affected. They're going to be, and really just watch the magic and just watch the patterns. And when you solidify that within your life, it becomes an automatic thing for you. You no longer question it. It just becomes, this is who I am. This is what I do.
Mm, mm. Greg, this has been such a rich, like yummy conversation. It's been so luscious, and I could absolutely talk with you for hours and hours. It's kind of like, oh, we're picking up a conversation that started 600 years ago, or probably even probably way longer than that.
I
So,
love it.
so one of the things I've been asking all of my guests this season, and I've been really loving this. Actually, I started it. I didn't quite start it at the beginning of the season, but I've been introducing it with every show since I did it. I really see the magic of this show is that it is timeless. It exists outside of time and space, and that the broadcast is almost like like the fabric of time. And what I believe is that you and I are having a conversation that goes back and forward in time. And that this is a conversation where we are time traveling to the younger Greg. We are time traveling to that point where maybe it was hockey Greg, maybe it was sick as a dog Greg, but that where he needs encouragement, where he needs love, where he needs support. And what I really love to do is imagine we've gone back in time and you are there with him. And maybe your hands are on his shoulders. Maybe you've got, your hands cupping his cheeks or something, and you're looking right in his eyes and you are telling him exactly what he needs to hear in order to be who he is today. So what is the message? Like you are giving, like we're getting into time machine, we're going back and we're telling Greg what he needs to hear. And I sincerely believe that we are doing magic that is going backwards and is allowing Greg to be here now. So what does he need to hear? What
You
is
know,
the medicine he needs?
I really love this. And this is work that I've actually have done already because
Yeah.
like you said, time doesn't really exist. It appears as it is, but we can go back in time and do things differently. And, I've gone back into my youth, into my childhood and, comforted that part that's that child, that inner child, that child that's still living. And, and I say to that child, there's nothing to fear is number one. There is nothing to fear because this is Maya. This is the illusion. And who you are in your heart is who you are, who you really are. You are divine. You are powerful. You are loved and you are always safe and always protected. That was one thing I didn't really get as a kid. And so going back and speaking to that and putting that into my younger self is an emotionally powerful thing. And I can still feel it. It feels very warm and safe and real. And, I just want to say that to my younger self, that, you are safe, you are guided, you are protected, and you are here for a reason. You have a purpose and it's going to unfold for you. But if you ever do get lost, know that your way back home is through your heart.
If you get lost, the way back home is through your heart. Oh, and what about like 30, 31-year-old, 32-year-old, sick as a dog, Greg? What does he need to hear?
No matter what happens, no matter if you don't make it, no matter if it's been decided that you are going to pass in this life, I had a fear of death, that it's just an illusion, it's another door, and that no matter what, you are always going to be a part of the Creator's love, that you are always going to be living and alive. It may not be in this world, but look at this world as another dream that you dreamed to be alive, to experience. And so there's nothing to fear. You are surrounded by your angels, by your guides, by your higher self. And no matter what it appears, no matter what you're going through, you're going to get through it. And you're always going to have the loving support that you need to get through it.
Mm, mm, mm. I think that's a message we all really need to hear right now. So thank you. So Greg, before I let you go, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I have a website, a couple websites actually, but I'm just going into one website. gregthehealer.com is my main website. I'm available on Instagram, Greg the Healer, and also I do a lot of my healings and teachings on TikTok. So I'm available there on Greg the Healer as well.
Yeah. Awesome. And your podcast.
Oh, and my podcast. Yes, Master of the Matrix with Greg M. Available everywhere. So come and check that out.
Awesome. And you guys, as you know, if you are a regular listener, all of these links will be in the show notes. Greg, thank you so much for such a delicious conversation. This has just been medicine. It's been food for the soul tonight. And I'm just so thankful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. My heart is just absolutely warm and vibrating so high. I honor you. Thank you so much.
Namaste.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.